Tonight, books to beat the January blues. I don't know about you, but it's really cold in our house. We obviously can't afford to put the heating on. So, all you can hope to do is to snuggle up warm of an evening or find a great book to read to beat those January blues. I get the feeling that my Facebook has a really slow connection. If anyone is watching there on Facebook, do let me know. It looks like Instagram is working well. But before we start, I'd just also like to add that if you are feeling the January blues and feeling like your house is really cold and you can't do that heating, which so many of us can't afford at the moment, then hula hooping while you read is clearly the answer. I'm just trying to angle things so that you might be able to get the full joy of the hula hooping. Can you see the hula hooping? You can on the Instagram, but you can't on Facebook. Hang on a minute. So this is something that I frequently urge people to do, is to try hula hooping while you read, because it's a really fun way to read and keep active. It does help if you have a bit of space. Ideally, you'd want to do it maybe in your sitting room. You obviously could do it outside. And I try and read for about 20 minutes every evening with a hula hoop. It keeps your abs in good shape. It's great for your torso. It's actually a really good way of stilling your restlessness. I know a lot of people feel restless when they're reading, and they therefore need to do something while they're reading. Some people like to do something with their hands, have a fidget spinner. I like to hula hoop, and it also has the effect of making you quite warm quite quickly. And it's a great way to spend a cold winter evening. I'll do a little bit more of that at the end of the session. So, books to read for the January blues. I wonder if you've got any books to recommend. Do let me know what you're reading, because I'd love to hear what you're reading at the moment. And I'm going to be talking partly about books I love and which I know are very positive and uplifting, and partly about books that I happen to be reading right now. So I'm going to start with a new book, which has only just come out in 2023, which is a horror. You might think that's an odd choice for a book to beat the January blues, but I do find that reading something really gripping and exciting that takes you into another world where things might be a bit terrifying, but rather exciting. Hello, Jim. Great to see you. Where are you in the world, Jim? And what are you reading? Anyone joining, do tell me what you're reading at the moment. Helen, I'd love to know what you're reading. S. Colborne, I don't know you as far as I know. Tell me what you're reading. It's great to have you here with me this evening, and I'd love to know, do you feel the January blues? And if you do you turn to books to escape them? And if so, what books are you reading? So I'm starting with a horror, controversially, which is called How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, only just out. I don't have the physical book, I'm afraid, because once again, it's a good old audio that I've been reading, but I'll tell you what it's about. Your past and your family can haunt you like nothing else. This is a hilarious and terrifying new novel from the New York New York Times best-selling author of The Final Girls Support Group, which I haven't read. This is actually my first book by Grady Hendrix, When Louise finds out her parents have died, she dreads going home. She doesn't want to leave her daughter with her ex and fly to Charleston. She doesn't want to deal with her family home, stuffed to the rafters with the remnants of her father's academic career and her mother's lifelong obsession with puppets and dolls. She doesn't want to learn how to live without the two people who knew and loved her best in the world. Mostly, she doesn't want to deal with her brother Mark, who never left their hometown, gets constantly gets fired from one job or another and resents her success. But she'll need his help to get the house ready for sale because it'll take more than some new paint on the walls and clearing out a lifetime of memories to get this place on the market. And by the way, this is a great book to read for people. It's probably why I liked it. For people who might have had to deal with the death of their parents and the cleaning out of their parents' houses, which is a situation that I am in right now, which is probably why I related to it. So it's a really great book about a haunted house, and it is pretty terrifying and quite grim at times, but a really good read. So that's How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix for anyone that does love a bit of horror. Helen says she's currently reading The House in the Cerulean Sea, which I haven't read. And she said she's also just read Other Birds by Sarah Addison Allen. I haven't read either of those. So many more books that I need to read. I love the sound of The House in the Cerulean Sea, I must say. Occasionally having to move these ear flaps so that I can hear myself. And obviously my lips have gone blue because it's so cold in this house. So I'm racing through a few different books this evening, which are either great escapist reads, some are classics, some are modern. They're all slightly randomly selected, I must admit, but many of them are total favourites from my years of reading, and I think they're particularly great for beating the January blues because they so effectively take you into another world, possibly another time, and allow you to be transported from cold, grey, grim January. Maybe some of you are in places which are not cold, grey, and grim. I hope so for your sake. But here in Sussex, it's been a cold, grey, very misty day. Though I did have a lovely walk on the South Downs in the mist. Colleen says she's reading Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, which I have read, and that is a fantastic book, which I actually must say would be a great one for escaping the January blues. I must say, a bit of fantasy or the kind of book that Neil Gaiman writes, which I wouldn't always call fantasy, but which takes you into a different mindset and quite often involves mythological creatures or ghosts or the unexpected and maybe slightly slipping into a parallel universe. All of those are great for escaping the January blues. But I'm going to talk to you next about a classic fantastic read for escaping the January blues, which is Hanif Qureshi's The Buddha of Suburbia. And this came to mind partly because it's a fantastic read. It takes you back to the 1970s to a very different world to the one that we're in now. But also because Hanif Qureshi has been much in my mind, because I'm sure that many of you are aware that he very recently had a kind of stroke, or I'm not quite sure what it is. I've been following his threads on Twitter, which are really beautifully written and deeply moving, that he is basically unable to move completely. I think he can't move his hands, and he can only move his lips, as far as I can tell. And he's dictating his blog and his thoughts onto Twitter via his son. And he is an amazing writer who's written a lot of fantastic novels. Laughing John is just saying that he's just read, I believe, The Buddha of Suburbia. By the way, John, if you haven't read Intimacy by Hanif Kureishi, I think you would probably love it. Another fantastic book by Kureishi. So, The Buddha of Suburbia um, is about a teenager who's 17 who lives with his mum and dad in a suburb of South London. He's called Karim, and he dreams of making his escape to the bright lights of the big city. But his father is no ordinary dad. He is the Buddha of Suburbia, a strange and compelling figure whose powers of meditation hold a circle of would-be mystics spellbound with the fascinations of the East. Among his disciples is the glamorous and ambitious Eva, and when the Buddha of Suburbia runs off with her to a crumbling flat in Baron's Court, Karim's life becomes changed in ways that even he had never dreamed of. This novel was published in 1990, but it's set in the 1970s, and it offers a view of life, love, and growing up by said Karim, who's a mixed race teenage son of an Asian father and English mother. And this book is particularly of its time, but always relevant because it does talk about racism in a way that is different now, but unfortunately, I'm sure is still to be felt. And there are many cultural references which are true to the 1970s, but it's one of those books which is relevant to any era in terms of coming of age, and it's quite simply a brilliant read. I'll just read you the first couple of paragraphs so that you get a flavour of it if you've never read it, but I bet most of you have read it out there. Put your hand up, anyone that has not read it. My name is Karim Amir, and I'm an Englishman born and bred, almost. I'm often considered to be a funny kind of Englishman, a new breed, as it were, having emerged from two old histories. But I don't care. Englishman I am, though not proud of it, from the South London suburbs, and going somewhere. Perhaps it is the odd mixture of continents and blood, of here and there, of belonging and not, that makes me restless and easily bored. Or perhaps it was being brought up in the suburbs that did it. Anyway, why search the inner room when it's enough to say that I was looking for trouble? Any kind of movement, action, and sexual interest I could find, because things were so gloomy, so slow and heavy in our family. I don't know why. Quite frankly, it was all getting me down, and I was ready for anything. Then, one day, everything changed. In the morning, things were one way, and by bedtime, another. I was 17. So it's a great start, and it really is a fantastic read, which I would recommend to anyone as an excellent read for escaping the January blues. I'm now going to move on to a very different kind of book. I am zipping back and forth in time, but this is India Nights, Darling, which just came out at the end of 2022. Look what a gorgeous book it is. Just looking at the cover takes you away from those January blues with its beautiful, bright, flowery colours. And this book is a kind of modern day revisiting of the characters in Nancy Mitford's The Pursuit of Love. So it's a great idea for a book club to read The Pursuit of Love and also then read this. Helen is just saying she's got a copy of this. Yay. I think you're going to love it. It's a really fun romp of a read. So just to give you a slight summary, it's about a family and a teenage girl again who are marooned in a sprawling farmhouse in Norfolk. Teenage Linda Radlett feels herself destined for greater things. She longs for love, but how will she ever find it? She can't even get a signal on her mobile phone. Linda's strict former rock star father terrifies any potential suitors away, while her bohemian mother, wafting around in silver jewellery, answers Linda's urgent questions about love with upsettingly vivid allusions to animal husbandry. It's actually very much based on the same kind of humour as Nancy Mitford's Pursuit of Love, which is what makes it all the more fun, because that's an absolute classic. If you haven't read it, it's a must. Eventually, Linda does find her way out from the bosom of her deeply eccentric extended family and moves to London to become a model. She knows she doesn't want to marry a man who looks like a pudding, as her good and dull sister Louisa has done, and marries the flashy, handsome son of a UKIP peer instead. But her new life is unromantic, darker, wilder, and more complicated than she expected. Then one day, at her lowest ebb, Linda spontaneously boards the Eurostar to Paris. There she's swept up in a feverish love affair that will upend her life completely. So this is obviously a brilliant book in its own right. It helps if you do know The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford, and because it just adds another layer of fun if you know it, because you can be thinking, oh, what's India Knight done with these characters to bring them into the 21st century, and how has she changed them or mirrored them in this day and age with their mobile phones and their Eurostars. So it could make sense to read The Pursuit of Love first if you've never read that before. And that is one of the funniest books ever written. Absolutely hilarious. So it was written in 1945. Nancy Mitford, one of the bright young things and also the oldest of the Mitford sisters, really hit trumps with this book when it was first published. She was encouraged by her friend Evelyn Waugh to take up novel writing. So there is a certain sympathy between the two of them in the way that they both wrote. Her writing was perhaps more akin to his, Evelyn Waugh's, than to, for instance, P.G. Woodhouse's. Nancy also had a great background, what with her family, to create characters and situations which were semi-autobiographical. Now I really am getting a bit hot under this hat. Narrated by Fanny, this is really a tale of her cousin Linda, whom everyone seems to like. Fanny herself has been brought up by an aunt because her mother and father divorced and left her, giving her mother the nickname of the Bolter. The Bolter is one of the best characters in the whole of literature, who is constantly running away from husbands or people she's meant to be with. With her aunt getting married, so she has new parents as such, and along with them, she spends quite a lot of time at the home of her other aunt and uncle. So we get lots of fantastically eccentric characters and at times situations as we follow Fanny and her cousins growing up and then onwards to romance and marriage. Fanny makes a respectable marriage and settles down having children. And of course, all of this is very much paralleled in Darling. But for Linda, although it may initially seem that way, things are different for her. And I won't tell you too much. If you haven't read it, it's an absolutely fantastic read. The Pursuit of Love, fabulous escapism, absolutely marvellous, and one that again takes you to a different place and time in an excellent way. So while we're on the subject of classics, another one that came to mind while I was thinking about books to take you away from the January blues was Brighton Rock by Graham Greene, which perhaps again some of you might think is an odd choice, a bit like my choice of the horror book that I first mentioned. But I do think everyone goes to books for different things. Some people would love a happy romance, sunshine, beaches, and knowing there's going to be a positive ending. Other people love intense drama and edginess. And Brighton Rock by Graham Greene has that in absolute spades. It was written and published in 1938, and it juxtaposes violence with poetry in often deeply unpleasant ways. It's all about a young man who is a criminal who's being pursued in Brighton at the very beginning. He's in an absolute state of terror, and as we begin the book, we completely empathise with him. But it's a really fascinating book because it goes deep into the world of gangs and criminal warfare in Brighton in the 1930s. And it's a pretty nail biting read, frankly, in many ways. It's quite a kind of densely written book, but it's absolutely exhilarating. And the reason I chose it as a January blues beating book is because of this amazing energy that it has. In a way, it has a similar kind of energy to um, Zorba the Greek, which I know John, who is one of our watchers tonight, is a lover of that book. And anyone that hasn't read Zorba the Greek, by the way, that would also be a fabulous January blues beating read. But this has an amazing energy in it, in a very different kind of way. It's a kind of criminal, feisty, fast moving energy. So I'll just read you the very beginning just to show you the pure speed of it. And I'm just going to quickly try and demist my lens. Sorry, Facebook watchers, but my lens is very misty. I think that's a bit better. There we go. Part one. Hale knew they meant to murder him before he had been in Brighton 3 hours. With his inky fingers and his bitten nails, his manner cynical and nervous, anybody could tell he didn't belong to the early summer sun, the cool Whitsun wind off the sea, the holiday crowd. They came in by train from Victoria every 5 minutes, rocked down Queen's Road, standing on the tops of the little local trams, stepped off in bewildered multitudes into fresh and glittering air. The new silver paint sparkled on the piers. The cream houses ran away into the west like a pale Victorian watercolour. A race in miniature motors, a band playing, flower gardens in bloom below the front, an aeroplane advertising something for the health in pale vanishing clouds across the sky. It had seemed quite easy to Hale to be lost in Brighton. 50,000 people besides himself were down for the day, and for quite a while he gave himself up to the good day, drinking gins and tonics wherever his programme allowed. For he had to stick closely to a programme. From 10 till 11, Queen's Road and Castle Square. From 11 till 12, the Aquarium and Palace Pier. 12 till 1, the front between the Old Ship and West Pier. Back for lunch between 1 and 2 in any restaurant he chose around the Castle Square. And after that, he had to make his way all down the parade to West Pier and then to the station by the Hove Streets. These were the limits of his absurd and widely advertised century go. So we're not quite getting to the exciting bit, but I actually just love the description of Brighton. I do live very close to Brighton, and I obviously love reading the book, partly for that reason, but I do really recommend it. It's actually not a long book, and it's really interesting in terms of the way the gangs work. And I've heard of similar events going on in Brighton very recently. So I do think little has changed perhaps since the time when Graham Greene wrote that novel. And that makes it all the more fun to read because you can totally picture the youth of today being in horribly similar situations. And indeed, I've heard of such situations where kids have been running around the train station trying to escape a local gang. And it's both horrifying and exciting. In the book, obviously in reality, it has a darker side. So that is Brighton Rock. Another older read, now have I got it here? Yes, I have, which I utterly recommend to anyone that hasn't yet had the joy of reading it, is Barbara Comyn's Our Spoons Came from Woolworths, which is an absolutely brilliant, very short novel, which I completely adore and first found back in 2011. Isn't it great when you write in your book? I thoroughly recommend that to people. Ideally, write where you bought it and make comments in your books as well, because it's really fun to look back on those. So Maggie O'Farrell, who is a wonderful author, said, I defy anyone to read the opening pages and not to be drawn in, as I was. Quite simply, Commons writes like no one else, says Maggie O'Farrell. And Helen is saying, a wonderful read. Yay! You have obviously read it too. And in fact, I've never read any other Barbara Commons, and I really must. But I do think she's a really fantastic writer. So it's about a girl called Sophia who is pretty unworldly, 21 years old, and she hastily is married to a young painter called Charles. She's an artist model with an eccentric collection of pets, and she's ill equipped to cope with the bohemian London of the 1930s, where poverty, babies, and husband conspire to torment her. Hoping to add some spice to her life, Sophia takes up with Peregrine, a dismal aging critic, and comes to regret her marriage and her affair. But in this case, virtue is more than its own reward. But I won't go on. So it's a really lovely read. I found it hilarious, though it actually does have some rather sad and tragic moments. And it doesn't shy away from the reality of bohemian life at that time, which really did have some pretty awful aspects, um, including some really tragic moments with babies, because the heroine does have two babies and she has an absolutely awful time going to hospital with one of the babies, but I won't tell you what happens. I'll just read you a little bit because I really love the voice in the book and I think it's incredibly refreshing and fantastically naive and old fashioned, but at the same time wise. I told Helen my story and she went home and cried. In the evening, her husband came to see me and brought some strawberries. He mended my bicycle too and was kind, but he needn't have been because it all happened 8 years ago and I'm not unhappy now. I hardly dare admit it, even touching wood, but I'm so happy that when I wake in the morning I can't believe it's true. I seldom think of the time when I was called Sophia Fairclough. I try and keep it pushed right at the back of my excuse me, right at the back of my mind. I can't quite forget it because of Sandro, and often I find myself regretting lovely little Fanny. Oh, there's another sneeze coming. Must be relating to this cold. I mean, the cold of the house. Not that I've got a cold. I can't quite forget it because of Sandro, and often I find myself regretting lovely little Fanny. I wish I hadn't told Helen so much. It's brought everything back in a vivid flash. I can see Charles's white pointed face and hear his husky nervous voice. I keep remembering things all the time. We met for the first time in a railway journey. We were both carrying portfolios. That is what started us talking to each other. The next day, Charles phoned me at the studio where I worked, and we met every day after that. The sun seemed to shine perpetually that summer. The days were all shimmering and beautiful. It never rained, yet everything remained fresh and green, even in London. The summers used to be like that when I was a child, and in the winters there was always deep snow or hard frost. The weather has grown all half-hearted now. Soon we won't be able to tell the change in the seasons except by the fall of the leaf, like it says in the Holy Bible, and that will be the end of the world. At least, I think it says that. So that's the very beginning of the book. Barbara comments, our spoons came from Woolworths. Really lovely, refreshing, unusual read. Moving on next to another refreshing, unusual, lovely book, The Food of Love by Anthony Capella. I wonder if any of you have read this. Thanks to my lovely sister-in-law, Anna McNamee, who gave me this book a few years ago, I discovered Anthony Capella, who is an absolutely brilliant author, but has not written enough books. Anthony Capella, I beg you to write some more books because I love all of your novels that I've read. This is The Food of Love. It's set in Rome and it's about a young girl, a student. She's called Laura. I think she's 21, who goes to Rome. Um, can't remember what she's actually doing there, but I think she's studying. And she decides that she's going to fall in love. So Laura Patterson, yeah, 24-year-old student, is spending a year studying art history in Rome. There you go. She's decided that from now on she'll only go out with a man who can cook. Then she meets Tommaso Massi, handsome and silver-tongued. He tells Laura that he's a chef at one of Italy's best restaurants. In reality, he's just a humble waiter. Then his best friend Bruno, who really is a chef and a brilliant one, he's called upon to help. But when he also falls for Laura, the sparks begin to fly. Now, it might sound like a cheesy romance, but no, Anthony Capella writes in a really beautiful way. It's funny, it is romantic, um, but it's just beautifully written and very clever, lovely writing. And it also has quite a lot of recipes in it, which is always fun for the foodies among you. You can tell that Anthony Capella is a great lover of food himself. It's kind of written a bit like a menu. So we start off with the antipasto at the very beginning, and I think he goes through the various courses as we carry on with the book. It is all kind of slightly flowery and vibe, but it is a really lovely, funny, great, happy, positive read. So this is a book for people among you who do love a bit of romance, but it's very beautifully written. And it also has quite a lot of surprises in it as well in terms of the plot. So it's by no means predictable. And I also must mention a couple of other books that he's written. There's The Various Flavours of Coffee, which is a really lovely book, all about the beginnings of coffee when they first came to England in the very end of the 19th century. And then there's also The Empress of Ice Cream, which is about how ice cream made its way from Italy through France to England at the time of Louis XIV. But it tells the story in a very sexy, exciting, and dramatic fashion, which is, I think, true of all of Anthony Capella's books. And again, I'll just read you a tiny section so that you can have a little glimpse of the way that Anthony Capella absolutely adores all things to do with food and drink. In a little side street of the Viale Glorioso in Rome's Trastevere, there is a bar known to those who frequent it simply as Gennaro's. It is to look at not much of a bar, being the approximate size and shape of a small one-car garage, but the passing tourist would note that there is room outside for two small tables and an assortment of non-identical plastic chairs that catch the sun in the morning, while the passing coffee lover should note that there is room inside on the stained zinc counter for a vast, gleaming Gaggia 6000, the Harley Davidson of espresso machines. There's also room just behind the stained zinc counter for Gennaro, widely regarded by his friends as the best barista in all Rome and a very sound fellow to boot. Which is why, one fine spring morning, 28-year-old Tommaso Massi and his friends Vincent and Sisto were standing at the bar, drinking ristretti, arguing about love, waiting for the cornetti to arrive from the bakery, and generally passing the time with Gennaro before jumping on their Vespers to go off to the various restaurants around the city that employed them. So you see, you're already literally in Rome, next to a coffee machine, smelling the glorious smell of Italian coffee. And that's what I love about Anthony Capella. He takes you right there into another country, another world, and into the lives of three people that you basically fall in love with and want the best for them. So another one which I may have mentioned at the end of last year because I only read it quite recently, is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which I just thought I'd bring in to this evening's discussion because it's another really great escapist novel if you enjoy something that rather messes with the boundaries of science fiction. Um, it's a really gripping novel, which does have something in the way in common with Matt Haig's The Midnight Library, in that it gives you alternate versions of reality and it does it in a really fun way. So, just to give you a bit of a summary of it, are you happy in your life? These are the last words Jason Dessen hears before the masked abductor knocks him unconscious, before he wakes to find himself strapped to a gurney, surrounded by strangers in hazmat suits, before the man he's never met smiles down at him and says, "Welcome back, my friend." In this world he's woken up to, Jason's life is not the one he knows. His wife is not his wife. His son was never born. And Jason is not an ordinary college physics professor, but a celebrated genius who's achieved something remarkable, something impossible. Is it this world or the other that's the dream? And even if the home he remembers is real, how can Jason possibly make it back to the family he loves? This is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch that we're talking about for people that are just joining. And it's an absolutely gripping and brilliant read. The answers lie in a journey more wondrous and horrifying than anything he could have imagined, one that will force him to confront the darkest parts of himself, even as he battles a terrifying, seemingly unbeatable foe. I can vouch for you that this is an absolutely compelling read. Um, Both me and my husband Carl read it when we were in holiday in America back in the summer, and we were absolutely riveted. It really takes you through the mill with our hero going from one reality to the other. And the fun thing about it is that he does have a certain amount of say over the realities that he goes into. A bit again, a bit like The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. He can sort of project the reality that he wants to make, but he needs to get it right in various ways if he's ever going to find his way back to his real wife and son. Or he could remain fixed in reality where he finds himself. So that is a gripping novel, which is great for taking you out of your January blues if you are experiencing them. Another one, which is a fantastic one to escape the January blues, is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, which, look at its gorgeous cover. It just makes you want to dive in to its sumptuous, beautiful, shiny covers. Just want to get into that book right now. Um, so this is a book which is about love, but it's not a romance. It's kind of about love between friends, really. So to give you a little bit of a summary, two kids meet in a hospital gaming room in 1987. It is a lot about video games, but you don't have to be a lover or even an understander of video games to love it. Speaking from personal experience, not someone that knows about games. One is visiting her sister, the other is recovering from a car crash. The days and months are long there. Their love of video games becomes a shared world of joy, escape, and fierce competition. But all too soon, that time is over and fades from view. When the pair spot each other 8 years later in a crowded train station, they're catapulted back to that moment. The spark is immediate. And together they get to work on what they love, making games to delight, challenge, and immerse players, finding an intimacy in digital worlds that eludes them in their real lives. Their collaborations make them superstars. So this is the story of the perfect worlds that Sam and Sadie build, the imperfect world that they live in, and everything that comes after success. Money, fame, duplicity, tragedy. So check that out. Not just a beautiful cover, but a brilliant book. And it's one of the books that was most recommended to me at the end of last year when I was doing a bit of a mini book tour. And everyone kept saying, oh, you've got to read tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And it is indeed a fantastic book. Laughing John is saying that I think you're referring to Dark Matter is good on audio with a dramatic American reading it. I can fully agree with that because I did also listen to it on audio, and I really loved the the dramatic rendition. It gets you even more into the book. So thumbs up from Laughing John for that one. Thanks for that. Um, then I also want to mention a book that I'm literally reading right now, which I would say is the ultimate perfect escaping the January blues novel, The Garnet Girls by Georgina Moore, which is actually not officially out until February. I've been lucky enough to get an advance copy, but I think it's out on around February the 14th. And this is a book that totally immediately takes you back in time, and it starts off in Venice, but it then moves into the Isle of Wight. And it does have something in common, perhaps, with India Nights Darling. It's a slightly similar, in a way, sort of slightly aristocratic world of a family who are the Garnets, who all have their various romances, loves, and losses to contend with. And I haven't finished it. I'm halfway through and absolutely loving it. But it is a combination of the story of the three girls who are the Garnet girls, who are the daughters of Margot and Richard, who had a love affair which was the stuff of legend but was ultimately doomed. When Richard walked out, Margot locked herself away, leaving her three daughters, Rachel, Imogen, and Sasha, to run wild. Years later, charismatic Margot entertains lovers and friends in her cottage on the Isle of Wight, refusing to ever speak of Richard and her painful past. But her silence is keeping each of the Garnet girls from finding true happiness. I won't go into the details of all the Garnet girls' complex relationships, but trust me in believing that it's a book that immediately takes you into a really deliciously different world to the current January misery that some of us might be going through. And I will just read you a little bit of it to give you a little inkling of the lovely Venetian moment at the very beginning of the book. Chapter 1, Sinking, Venice. Imogen watched the door shut behind William and fell back against the pillows. William liked to get his money's worth at the hotel breakfast buffet, but Imogen had no patience in the mornings for tourists with heads bent over maps, as if in prayer. The solemn hush, the stealing of sly glances at residents as they entered the dining room. Tourists in Venice were so earnest. To please William, Imogen had experimented with breakfast at La Calcina, but all the getting up and down for bits of hard cheese and cold meat, a stale croissant and a cube of butter on ice, had made her self-conscious. And the breakfast room was gloomy with Venetian burgundy and brocade twirls everywhere. There was a certain kind of opulent Italian decor that looked good at night, but in daylight reminded Imogen of a sad and shabby Victorian theatre. Margot had always made them have a big breakfast on holiday, so they could skip lunch for church visits. On cultural trips, Margot had kept them on their feet all day, marching out in front, her strident call of "Girls!" turning heads on all sides. Imogen remembered being embarrassed by how English Margot sounded, how unmistakably herself. She never seemed to care about the looks she provoked. Heartened by the thought that Margot was not with her now, Imogen threw off her sheets and, like a ghostly blur, span around the hotel room, clattering open all the shutters. She made so much noise that passers-by glanced up from the canal side below. The waiters laying out cutlery at the floating restaurant turned their heads. If they had caught a glimpse of her, they would have seen that she was naked. But before anyone could see more than a flash of skin, Imogen was quickly back under the sheets, basking in the sunlight that now warmed every corner of the room. So that's The Garnet Girls by Georgina Moore. It's her debut novel. Everyone is falling in love with The Garnet Girls, as it says on the cover. It will be coming out in early February, so do get hold of a copy. That is probably my top tip for beating the January blues, because it takes you to Venice, it takes you to the Isle of Wight, it has dastardly deeds going on in the past, it has romance going on in the present. It's all incredibly exciting. This one too, India Nights Darling, which is a modern day retelling of The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford, is hilarious, brilliantly written, very good. Might as well recap the others. Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which Laughing John also loved, and it's a really interesting read that takes you into other possible worlds and makes you think about how you would change things if you could, and what kind of reality you would create if you were able to create your own reality. The Food of Love by Anthony Capella, an absolute favourite, set in Rome. Very vivid and wonderful descriptions of food, wine, coffee, and love. Love Anthony Capella. Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. Exhilaratingly dastardly and criminal, and a fantastic read. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zavin, which is set in a video game world, but you don't have to appreciate video games to enjoy it. And of course, Our Spoons Came from Woolworths by Barbara Commons, which is a book I absolutely love. I've just seen that Planty's joined. Hello. And I was going to mention, but hadn't got around to it, The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim, which is a great favourite of both mine and Planty's. And anyone that hasn't read that here must read it, but I'm sure that everyone probably has. Kate from Book Club Review Podcast, I wonder if you've got any particular books that you would recommend for beating the January blues. Do let us know if you've got any particular suggestions. Oh yes, and I didn't mention in my roundup, let's get rid of that, The Buddha of Suburbia, which is an absolutely joyous, brilliant, lovely read that takes you back to the 1970s, and it's particularly a great one to read right now because we know that Hanif Kureishi is having a really hard time not being able to move and being stuck in a hospital in Rome. I think he is in Rome. He's definitely in Italy. So on that note, I will also just remind you that another great way for beating the January blues is to hula hoop and read, ideally with enough room in your house to do that hula hooping. I'm just going to adjust the angle of my laptop to give you the full joy of the hula hooping, which can be a slight challenge. It's something that I normally do in my living room where I've got a bit more space of an evening, or I can do it up here if I move my furniture around cleverly. But I really do urge you to give it a go. Hula hoop and read. It's a great way to be active while reading. It keeps you warm. It literally does warm you up by, it seems like not the biggest movement, but actually this minimal movement does use quite a lot of energy. and definitely burns those calories and also gives you a bit of extra zest and positivity for beating the January blues. And also, it's great for actually reading while you hula hoop. Viewing all sorts of saying, thank you for all your ideas. Some old friends and new suggestions. Thank you very much for coming. So thanks all of you for coming this evening. It's been lovely to have you. If anyone does have any other suggestions for the kind of books that you would read to beat the January blues, do let me know. Send me a message either you can DM me on Instagram, you can put comments on Instagram, you can tweet me, you can email me, ella@ellavertu.com, and many other methods of getting hold of me. I'd love to know your thoughts. And don't forget, also consider booking a bibliotherapy session, which is a great way for beating those January blues as well. Start the new year with a bibliotherapy session, which is one-to-one with me, takes an hour. We do it on Zoom or similar, and you fill in a questionnaire first, and then at the end of it, I give you a book list of 6 books that are going to be your perfect books to read over the next few weeks. So think about having a bibliotherapy session as another great way to beat those January blues. Thanks so much for coming. I'll see you